Alright folks, so here we go. We got Ken Cuccinelli was unlawfully appointed to top immigration post, judge rules. A federal judge has ruled that Ken Cuccinelli was unlawfully appointed to lead the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency and as a result lacked authority to give asylum seekers less time to prepare for initial screening interviews. Cuccinelli, a former Virginia Attorney General and an immigration hardliner, was named to a new position of Principal Deputy Director in June, which immediately made him acting director because Lee Francis Cisna had just resigned. The agency grants green cards and other visas and also oversees asylum officers. U.S. District Court Judge Randolph Moss in Washington found Cuccinelli's appointment violated the Federal Vacancies Reform Act and in 1998 law governing who is eligible to lead federal agencies in an acting capacity. The impact of the ruling wasn't immediately clear. The ruling issued Sunday was at odds with President Trump's panache for temporary appointments at Homeland Security. Chad Wolf is acting secretary, and the heads of Customs, Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Citizenship and Immigration Services are all in acting roles. Why is this? This is because he can't get his people approved in time. They all have to go through Senate confirmations, and they are bogging them down in there. And the reason why? Well, because they're all dirty. Continuing on. The judge wrote that Cuccinelli didn't qualify for exemptions for officials who won Senate approval for other positions or spent 90 days in the previous year at the agency. The administration's reading of the law would decimate this carefully crafted framework, Moss wrote in his 55-page ruling that he released on Sunday. The president would be relieved of responsibility and accountability for selecting acting officials, and the universe of those eligible to serve in an acting capacity would be vastly expanded. Moss, an appointee of President Obama, set aside a Cuccinelli directive to give asylum seekers less time to consult attorneys before an initial screening interview, but his decision applies only to the 5 Hondurans who sued. Alright, we've read all we need to read of this. Why is the deep state hitting at Ken Cuccinelli? This is all about Trump's intention to renominate Ratcliffe to lead the DNI. If you'll remember, Trump already did this once, and Ratcliffe withdrew because everybody from both sides lost their minds over it. They did not want this man as the head of DNI. President Donald Trump said on Friday that he intends to nominate Representative John Ratcliffe, a Republican from Texas, as his permanent director of national intelligence, the second time the president has attempted to make the loyalist lawmaker his spy chief. I am pleased to announce the nomination of Representative Congressman John Ratcliffe to be director of national intelligence, Trump said on Twitter. Would have completed process earlier, but John wanted to wait until the IG report was finished. John is an outstanding man of great talent. Ratcliffe had been nominated as Trump's pick to be Director of National Intelligence after Dan Coats, Deep State confirmed, stepped down from the post in July 2019. But the Texas congressman withdrew his name from consideration after lawmakers from both parties, all Deep State, raised concerns about his qualifications. CNN reported earlier this week that the president was once again considering Ratcliffe to be the permanent director. Trump appointed American ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, to be the acting director of national intelligence earlier this month. He had until March 11th to pick a new permanent spy chief. The choice of Ratcliffe to be the new permanent director and the earlier choice to install Grenell as acting director offer more evidence that Trump is looking for a loyalist to lead the intelligence services he has so often maligned during his presidency. And this is just part of reading the mainstream media. We have to just accept this kind of stuff. We know that Trump isn't looking for a loyalist because he wants to gain control over intelligence agencies he's maligned. He wants to get somebody in there who isn't trying to remove him from office illegally. Just someone who won't run a coup on him every decision he makes. And keeping in mind that the DNI is a bureaucracy, it is under the administrative state, the executive branch, which would make this person underneath the president. Loyalty has been something Trump has focused on as he looked for a candidate for the permanent job. During conversations about the role with potential nominees, the president has attempted to assess how loyal they would be to him should they be nominated and confirmed for the job. Two sources told CNN. Trump was looking for a pick who would back his mandate, explained one of the sources. Okay, which is completely and utterly normal. The only thing is different in this circumstance than in every other presidency is that presidents in the past that knew the game because they were politicians cleaned house immediately. With the Trump presidency, they didn't do that, and so because of that, they were literally filled with enemies. And they kept leaking on Trump, and they kept releasing all these information, and so they did everything that they did. So Trump is looking for loyalty because he needs somebody who's going to follow the law. It's funny because really what he wants is somebody like Bill Barr for Department of Justice, just somebody who will actually look at the facts. And that is going to make people on both sides of the aisle, and the media for sure, everybody's going to lose their minds. But it's completely normal that a president would be looking for a pick that is intent on backing his mandate. Why would you hire people below you that are going to work against your mandate? It doesn't make any sense. There's not been anything like the resistance that they've put on Trump. But why is it that they're so scared of Ratcliffe?
It's not impeachment by collusion. It's not impeachment by conspiracy. It's not impeachment by obstruction of justice. That all fell apart the minute Bob Mueller said, I've never heard of Fusion GPS. So their white whale of impeachment, they've decided it's got to be this whistleblower and this call that the president had. And now what are we finding out? That the person in charge of running this investigation lied to everyone about his contact with the whistleblower and helped start the process. This is as unfair as you can possibly imagine. It's worse than the Russia collusion hoax.
The timeline that we're calling the entrapment timeline, where several international quote-unquote diplomats reached out to George Papadopoulos, some from Australia, others from Britain, others from the U.S., Italy. And I want to ask you about this one that he was invited to London by Stefan Halper. And Stefan Halper introduced him to his quote-unquote assistant, Azra Turk. And at that meeting in September of 2016, they had a conversation. And, of course, now we know that Stefan Halper was a spy, so the whole conversation was recorded. He was wearing a wire. That conversation was Halper saying to Papadopoulos, it's great that Russia has all these emails on Hillary Clinton. You must be really happy. Trump has to be happy. And George Papadopoulos answers and says, and this is told to me by George Papadopoulos, he answers and says, that's crazy. I would never do something like that. That's treason. And we know that that conversation was recorded. Is that the transcript that you and Trey Gowdy and others have suggested is exculpatory evidence that was not given to the FISA court?
Well, if there is a transcript, I think everyone would agree, based on what you've just said, if there is a transcript of what you just related, that absolutely should have been provided to the FISA court. And the good news is we'll get a definitive answer from the Inspector General when this report gets issued in the next week or two about whether or not that was done. I'm just telling you that I've staked my credibility on this, that I think that the information that should have been turned over to the FISA court wasn't, and that the FISA process wasn't followed, and that when Jim Comey and Adam Schiff and others say that the FISA abuse idea is a bunch of nonsense, that they're wrong. But we'll find out. There are a lot of folks that are worried about finding out who really interfered more or tried to interfere more in the 2016 election, the Russians or the Obama administration. We did subpoena Glenn Simpson, the Fusion GPS co-founder, the person who commissioned the infamous Steele dossier paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. He has indicated through his lawyers that he plans to take the Fifth or assert his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The reason for that, Maria, is that Glenn Simpson had previously testified under oath to the House Intelligence Committee that he never met with Bruce Orr or discussed with Bruce Orr the Steele dossier prior to the October FISA application in 2016 or the 2016 presidential election. That is in direct contradiction to what Bruce Orr told me under oath last month. So I'm not surprised that Glenn Simpson is taking the Fifth. He probably should. He's in real legal jeopardy. Very clearly, someone is not telling the truth. Nellie Orr, Bruce Orr's wife, certainly can shed some light with respect to that circumstance, but we also need to find out from Nellie Orr, who was paid $40,000 by Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS for her work, including the work on the Steele dossier, why that fact, the fact that the wife of the number 4 person at the Department of Justice, who along with her husband had operational roles with respect to the Steele dossier, that fact wasn't disclosed by the Department of Justice when they presented that evidence to the FISA court. Well, ultimately, the questions with respect to the FISA court and the representations that were made, remember what we're talking about is the extraordinary measure of getting a warrant to spy on an American citizen. And if that was done under false pretenses with false information or false verifications, then that's violating someone's civil liberties under color of law, 42 U.S.C. 1983 violation. So that's why we need to talk to Nellie Orr and others to try and determine what the FBI knew, when they knew it, what the Department of Justice knew, when they knew it, and why those representations weren't fully disclosed to the FISA court. You know, the same folks that prejudged Hillary Clinton's innocence, prejudged Donald Trump's guilt, and the same names are the same folks whose conduct is at issue with respect to how evidence was presented or not presented to the FISA court. Well, the reason for that, Maria, is that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has not appointed a special counsel. Think about the extraordinary circumstance that you just described. The head of the FBI, Acting Director Andy McCabe, and the head of the Department of Justice with respect to the Russia investigation, Rod Rosenstein, in direct conflict with one another, each accusing the other of not telling the truth with regard to whether or not someone wanted to record the President of the United States. That's why we have special counsel provisions. The FBI and the Department of Justice cannot be expected to fairly investigate that matter when the heads of both of those components at the Department of Justice are in direct conflict. There should be a special counsel so that we can get answers to these questions. All of the documents that Chairman Nunes and others are seeking to declassify, to have the president declassify, I have seen them. And I can tell you as a former federal prosecutor, my opinion is that declassifying them would not expose any national security information, would not expose any sources and methods. It would expose certain folks at the Obama Justice Department and FBI and their actions taken to conceal material facts from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
I'm going to ask you about this. I want to give you an opportunity to hopefully answer these questions once and for all so that the rest of your testimony can be properly directed. It seems like some of my Democratic colleagues, because this FISA process was initiated during the Obama administration, that they want to focus on the fact that there was no abuse of the FISA process or that that abuse was not politically motivated. It started with Chairman Nadler. The very first question to you was, trying to establish that the Inspector General found no evidence of political motive or bias against the president, and you responded that the Inspector General's report speaks for itself. So does the Inspector General, and Inspector General Horowitz on December 11th before the Senate Judiciary Committee said this, quote, "On the FISA side, we found, as you noted, a lack of documentary or testimonial evidence about intentionality, but we also noted the lack of satisfactory explanations and, in fact, leave open the possibility that for the reasons you indicated, it is unclear what the motivations were. On the one hand, gross incompetence, negligence. On the other hand, intentionality, and everywhere in between," end quote. Just because no FBI agent tells the Inspector General, "I admit I'm biased and politically motivated against President Trump," doesn't mean there isn't overwhelming evidence of bias and political motivation in the record. To use just one example, an FBI lawyer involved intimately in this FISA process against a Trump campaign associate, Carter Page, sent a number of texts in and around the election of President Trump. Here are a few of them. "The crazies finally won." Another one. "This is the Tea Party on steroids." Another one. "Pence is stupid." Another text that he sent. "I just can't imagine the systematic disassembly of the process, the progress we've made over the last 8 years. And finally, when asked whether he intended to keep working during the Trump administration, he said, quote, "Viva la resistance." Regardless of what that FBI lawyer admitted, do you see evidence of political bias or motivation against President Trump in those text messages?
Well, I would just say, Congressman, as I've said before, that I consider the report to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who we are as an institution. I'm not going to comment on specific people's conduct for a variety of reasons, but I will say that political bias has no place in today's FBI.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm going to ask you to comment on someone's specific conduct, because that very same FBI agent is the one the Inspector General found in his report was the one that tampered with evidence by counterfeiting an email from an intelligence agency to illegally continue surveillance of a Trump campaign associate. That's what happened, right, Director?
Again, I would just refer you to the report.
Well, the report acknowledges that. So does the Department of Justice and the FISA court. They acknowledge that this was illegal surveillance with respect to at least several of these FISA applications because there was not probable cause or proper predication, correct?
Right.
So, to the point of one of my Democratic colleagues that there was no fraud on the court, illegal surveillance and changing evidence to conduct illegal surveillance is the very definition of fraud on the court, is it not?
Well, I certainly think it describes conduct that's utterly unacceptable.
And it's what took place here.
Well, again, I refer to the report. We have accepted, I've been very clear about this, we've accepted every finding in the Inspector General's report, including some that are extremely painful to us as an institution.
And I appreciate it, Director Wray. I love the FBI. You know my background. I know what you're trying to do. I know the difficult position that you're in. I think the record is clear. I remain convinced that the prior administration weaponized the FBI for political motivation and purposes. I just wonder whether or not you're going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I truly know that your motivations are to do that. I wish you the best of luck. I yield back. You know, justice is a blindfolded lady holding a set of scales. No one's finger is supposed to be on the scales. And these facts continue to lend themselves to the narrative that there were folks in the Obama FBI and Justice Department that prejudged Hillary Clinton's innocence and prejudged Donald Trump's guilt or involvement with respect to the Russian government and potential collusion with them.
I actually disagree with Attorney General Barr when he says that Bob Mueller could have reached a decision. Bob Mueller should have reached a decision. Maria, there isn't anyone in the country, Republican or Democrat, who expected Bob Mueller, after everything you just related, 2 years of this, to come back and tell us that he wasn't able to reach a decision or a conclusion, especially when he was able to reach a decision on the most important aspect, whether or not anyone committed any crime by colluding with Russia. Bob Mueller put a stake in the heart of this collusion conspiracy narrative as it related to Donald Trump. He did exactly what a prosecutor is supposed to do. That's what's so surprising and puzzling about why he then went on for 200 more pages in his report and did exactly what a prosecutor isn't supposed to do, which is talk about potential crimes, potential conduct of someone that he has no intention of charging with anything. It doesn't make any sense. And to your point about that advisory OLC opinion that Bob Mueller used as the basis, I wish I could tell you that I agreed with his analysis. The idea and the explanation that he gave, that OLC opinion stands for the proposition that you can investigate a sitting president but not reach a decision or a conclusion about whether criminal activity occurred, is just absurd. I wish I could tell you that it conjures up James Madison, but all I can think about is Billy Madison, the part of the movie where they say everyone in the room is now dumber for having listened to that explanation, because it makes no sense at all.
Well, Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Yeah, it's this idea that what Bob Mueller was supposed to do was investigate and then make a referral to Congress. It doesn't work that way, Maria. Members of Congress make criminal referrals to the Department of Justice because they have the ability to convene grand juries, issue subpoenas, conduct interviews, and make a determination whether or not conduct rose to criminal activity. It doesn't work the other way around. The Justice Department doesn't make referrals to Congress to decide on whether or not something criminal has happened. Yeah. So I think that idea is just equally ridiculous. It was on July 31st of 2016 that the FBI opened this counterintelligence investigation that related to the Trump campaign, Operation Crossfire Hurricane. It was opened by FBI agent Peter Strzok. So it's interesting that 18 days later, on August 17th of 2016, that the FBI and CIA conducting a counterintelligence briefing for the purpose of protecting and warning Donald Trump would put in charge of coordinating that briefing Peter Strzok, the same agent who was already investigating the Trump campaign. The same agent who 8 days before that defensive briefing to protect and warn Donald Trump sent a text message saying he was going to stop him, and who 2 days before that defensive briefing sent a text message saying we need an insurance policy against a Trump presidency. So little wonder that on that date of August 17th, 2016, Donald Trump wasn't warned about Russian interference in his campaign. He wasn't briefed about the Steele dossier. He wasn't briefed about Carter Page. And, you know, Jim Comey came out this week, Maria, and said, well, we wouldn't have wanted to tip off anyone about that. August 25th, 2016, CIA Director John Brennan picked up the phone and called Democratic Minority Leader Harry Reid and briefed him on Russian interference into the Trump campaign, about the Steele dossier, and about Carter Page. So, you know, this is why Bill Barr is saying this stuff doesn't add up about the origins of this investigation, and why he is why he says it doesn't jive and we need to get to the bottom of it.
So
these documents that go to the origin that many of us, like Trey Gowdy and Devin Nunes and myself, have been asking to be declassified, the president did give that declassification authority to Bill Barr. One theory that I have as to why we have not yet seen those is because Bill Barr instead named a second special counsel, John Durham. And if I were a special prosecutor looking into these things, those documents and what I know they establish are things that I would want to use before a grand jury to determine whether or not indictments should be issued, whether or not anyone's conduct as it related to the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation or the obstruction investigation warrant criminal charges. I think there is going to be accountability. I think that sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied. I told your viewers repeatedly that John Durham couldn't act until the Inspector General Michael Horowitz issued his report. When he issued that report with those damning findings against the FBI and the Department of Justice and folks there tampering with evidence to continue a counterintelligence investigation wrongfully against first candidate Trump and then against a sitting president, John Durham came out that day and said he agreed with a lot of what the Inspector General had in terms of findings of fact, but disagreed with whether or not there was a proper predicate to begin this. Now we come up with evidence that's recently been reported that one of the folks that John Durham talked to was an embassy official who reached out to George Papadopoulos 3 months before Crossfire Hurricane was ever opened. That's a sign that John Durham is looking at the fact that this may include Obama administration officials beyond law enforcement, perhaps to include our intelligence community, folks like John Brennan, and based on his reputation and his prior work, I have every confidence that John Durham will help share the truth with the American people, and they'll get a better picture of really how the Democratic administration before this one targeted President Trump and was aided by Democrats who paid for Russian disinformation to try and frame this president before he ever got into office. Officials at our U.S. embassies overseas going to meet with a campaign official for the Trump campaign, not in their official capacity, but the explanation that they give is just out of personal curiosity. It's not their job, but beyond that, it doesn't make any sense. Look, here's what I can tell your viewers is, Trey Gowdy and I were the only Republicans that were allowed to see all of the classified documents back during the FISA abuse investigation. And at that time, we both saw documents that reflected that John Brennan and Jim Comey gave conflicting testimony about the Steele dossier. Brennan says Comey was pushing the Steele dossier to be included in the intelligence community assessment. Comey says that it was Brennan that was pushing it. They both testified under oath before Congress and two investigators to that fact. They both can't be telling the truth. Those are the things that John Durham is focusing on. And again, I'm confident that justice delayed is not justice denied. There'll be a full accounting.
So are you picking up what I'm putting down? I think it's pretty obvious why they don't want Ratcliffe as DNI. And I don't know why I'm saying this, but I think he's going to become DNI. And this is, with literally everything laid against them, because the little appointment scheme that they'd been running, like they did with Ken Cuccinelli, they had done that with several appointments where they had created a position title, put the person there, and then the person in the actual position stepped down, and then that would put them there. And they were able to, in that way, staff some places without confirmation, which has proven to be very swampy. The same hard-charging Senate that has confirmed tons of judges for Mr. Trump seems to not be able to get a Senate confirmation for even the most basic positions. When it comes to DNI, the reason why is because, and I didn't mean to rhyme just then, but the reason why is because many from both sides of the aisle in Washington are terrified that somebody like Ratcliffe would be put in that position. Because they've already got the goods on these guys. Trump needs his squad, his car, he needs a group of close-knit guys like Untouchables that will be willing to do justice, which is different than the law. Like, obviously the law has failed us, and that's clear. But, justice still exists in this world. I think this group decided they were going to stay within legal bounds and do it that way, and they've been doing a pretty damn good job about it. So, he announces Ratcliffe. Senators from both sides of the aisle freak out, and then, the white hats take note, write everybody's name down. And then Trump withdraws his name, and Ratcliffe writes a little love letter on Twitter to Trump saying how he would do him great, but, he understands and he wants to step back. Then Trump renominates him, and they can't help but to fall for it again. And I said earlier, I don't know if he's going to actually get the position, but even if they are just running this same grift twice on the deep state, it's hilarious, because now they've got this judge out here, and he dropped his ruling on the appointment on Ken Cuccinelli specifically to block that kind of maneuver with the DNI. And he released his judgment on Sunday when Trump announced Ratcliffe's nomination on Friday. So it was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday that judge had that ruling out. Have you ever heard a judge releasing a ruling on a Sunday? Can somebody please tell me what the heck is up with that? And we're going to talk about that judge. Let me just show you a couple of things. And then we're over here on Open Secrets, and we're looking at the judge. I just pulled up 2007, and sure enough, here we go. Of course, he's donating to all Democrats. He donated $4,600 to the man who appointed him as a federal judge. This is why Trump is always on these, what he calls Obama judges. Because they're literally, every time you get a ruling against Trump about anything, you go back and you look, and it's the same group of people every time. And it's amazing how how these judges, like Judge Amy Berman Jackson and Judge Randolph Moss. It's funny how these judges end up on the same, over and over again end up on all these cases. Trump loses another asylum ruling as D.C. judge vacates port of entry rule. U.S. District Judge Randolph Moss said the rule violates federal immigration laws and violates the Administrative Procedures Act. There he is. The Trump administration's new rule would limit asylum claims on the southern border to immigrants who enter through a designated port of entry was vacated by a Washington federal judge Friday. So let's be clear about what we're reading here. This judge, back in August 2nd of 2019, issued a stay. He vacated the port of entry rule. Okay? This is August 2nd, 2019. This is judicial activism right here, right? Now, watch this. It's now September 11th, 2019. So a month and a week, something like that. And the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Trump administration on their asylum program. It's a 7-2 vote. Okay. So now we flash forward a year, and this judge has used the Federal Vacancies Reform Act to rule that Cuccinelli, who created the asylum rule, was illegally appointed. And so, therefore, even the ruling from the Supreme Court, this judge is trying to suggest, isn't valid because Cuccinelli came up with the rule and Cuccinelli is not a valid appointment. So this judge rules against the asylum, then gets overruled by the Supreme Court, and then comes back and makes this ruling that Cuccinelli is not a legal appointee. And then therefore, he never made an official ruling that all of Cuccinelli's actions are to be taken back, but he did rule on one rule that Cuccinelli came up with, that it should be pulled back, which opens the door for all of them. This is judicial activism. Of course, as far back as June 7th, 2016, you had Judge Randolph Moss making rulings in the Clinton email case. The FBI has asked a federal judge for permission to file a second secret declaration detailing its probe into Hillary Clinton's private email server. The FBI currently has possession of the server Clinton used to run her personal email setup as part of an investigation into whether classified information was mishandled. The filing would be the second secret declaration issued as part of a FOIA lawsuit, which was launched by Vice News journalist Jason Leopold. The Justice Department did not ask for court approval before filing its first secret declaration earlier this year, prompting outrage from Leopold's attorney. Afterwards, Judge Randolph Moss ruled that the department would not also have to provide a redacted version of the filing for the public. So here's Randolph Moss allowing the Justice Department and the FBI to not respond to this FOIA request about Hillary Clinton's email server. And the judge goes further to rule that they don't even have to provide a redacted version of their investigation. Judge Randolph Moss, who is a graduate of Yale. Judge Randolph Moss, who, after leaving the Department of Justice, Judge Moss returned to the Washington office of his previous law firm, now Wilmer, Cutler, Pickering, Hale, and Dorr, LLP, where he chaired the Regulatory and Government Affairs Department. He left the firm upon his confirmation to the bench in November 2014. So he was just a lawyer, and he chaired a regulatory board, right? Not exactly just a lawyer. Because back on Open Secrets, it's not hard to find in 2002. Here he is, Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, registered as a lobbyist. So he was a lobbyist, not just a lawyer who chaired a board. He was lobbying and donating to Democrat politicians, right up until he was appointed by a Democrat-appointed politician. Do not doubt me on this. It'd be very interesting to see what comes of this situation. If Trump withdraws his name a second time, then they will have twice pulled deep state operatives out of the dark off of the same grift of just announcing that he's going to nominate this guy that triggers them, and then they all freak out, and then Trump and his team take note, okay, that one, and that one. Then they withdraw his name, and then a year later they just throw it back out there again. And he did this on Friday. The judge, he issues this ruling about Ken Cuccinelli on Sunday. Couldn't even wait for Monday. When do you hear judges issuing rulings on Sundays? Like, share, subscribe. We'll be doing more of this over the next few days.